I used to believe that raising children was all about passing down love. But at this stage in my life, I've come to a hard truth sometimes. Raising kids means preparing for the day you'll need to defend yourself from their schemes. I felt the weight of this realization settle deep in my chest, dull yet persistent, like the prick of a needle. At 66 years old, I thought I knew everything there was to know about family, about giving, about nurturing. I'd spent my entire life teaching, first as an art teacher in a middle school, then later as a mother, but nothing could have prepared me for the betrayal that came from my own daughter-in-law, Jessica. Jessica never called, never texted, just casually brought her parents into our home. She moved them straight into what was once my sanctuary, my master bedroom. Her parents, whom I had met only once at my son Evan's wedding, arrived with nothing but smiles, as if they belonged there. Jessica greeted me with that same forced cheerfulness she always had, looping her arm through mine and saying, "Mom, you're going to move into the guest room. My parents are getting older. Their joints aren't great, and the master bedroom gets better light. It'll be better for them." In that moment, I stood there, feeling like a trespasser in my own home. The house I had paid for, the house my late husband and I had carefully built over the years, was no longer mine. The golden afternoon light that streamed through the windows did nothing to warm the icy feeling spreading through me. I looked at the room that had once been my safe place, my retreat from the world. Now, it was cluttered with unfamiliar suitcases, mismatched linens, and the remnants of someone else's life. As for the so-called guest room, well, it was barely recognizable. My late husband's favorite chair was shoved against the wall, the furniture haphazardly piled into corners. It was clear there was no place left for me in this house physically, emotionally, or otherwise. I didn't scream, didn't cry. Arguing with Jessica would be pointless, as would confronting Evan, who always deferred to his wife. I knew that standing up for myself would only make things worse. So, I quietly packed a suitcase, telling myself they probably thought I was just upset and would be back soon, ready to play my part as their unpaid nanny and emergency ATM. But I had learned enough over the years to know that sometimes walking away is the only way to regain control. And that's exactly what I did. I called my lawyer that afternoon. What they didn't know was that I had already begun the process of selling the house. As I packed my small suitcase that afternoon, the reality of what had just happened sank deeper into my bones. It was surreal, like a bad dream that I couldn't shake. Jessica, my daughter-in-law, had moved her parents in without even asking me. It was as if my years of hard work and sacrifice, the very foundation of this house, had been erased in a single, casual decision. I hadn't raised my son Evan to be this way. He had grown up watching me, and his father worked tirelessly to provide a good life, to teach him respect and gratitude. But somewhere along the way, that lesson seemed to have fallen through the cracks. I thought I had raised him better, yet here he was, standing by, silent, as his wife took over our home. Our home. I could feel the weight of that silence, the emptiness in the air. As I quietly closed my suitcase and looked around the house I had shared with my husband for over 30 years, the house we had built together, brick by brick, through decades of laughter, tears, and memories. And now, in a blink of an eye, it no longer felt like mine, not physically, not emotionally, not in the way it once had. Jessica, with her perfectly curated image, her endless shopping sprees and obsession with appearances, had already established her place. She had moved in, and with her, her entitled attitude. Every word she spoke, Every little comment about low-fat food or updating my outdated style made me feel like I was just an accessory in my own home. I wasn't a person anymore. I wasn't a mother or a grandmother or a woman who had worked all her life. I was just a figure to be moved aside when inconvenient. The worst part was seeing Evan's reaction, or rather, his lack of one. I thought that, as my son, he would stand up for me. I thought that when his wife made this decision, he would at least say something, anything to defend the home we had built. But no, his silence was deafening. I knew deep down that he had been under Jessica's thumb for so long that he had forgotten how to think for himself. He had become a passive participant in his own life, allowing his wife to take the lead on everything. It was a betrayal, plain and simple, and it broke me. That afternoon, as I slipped my shoes off at the door and quietly walked out, I realized that I couldn't stay in this toxic environment anymore. I had sacrificed so much for them. I had spent years pouring my heart into this family, thinking that it would be appreciated, that they would be grateful. But no. Instead, I had been reduced to a mere afterthought, pushed aside so that Jessica could have her way. As I left, I felt a strange sense of calm settle over me. Yes, I was hurt. Yes, I was angry. But more than anything, I felt free. For the first time in years, I wasn't trying to keep the peace. I wasn't bending over backward to make sure everyone was happy. I was just walking away. And for once, it felt like the right thing to do. I had always prided myself on being strong. I had built this life with my own 2 hands, and I would be damned if I let anyone take it from me now. I might have been quiet for years, taking everything in stride. But the truth was, I was done. Done with the manipulation, done with the disrespect, done with the lies. After I left the house, I called my lawyer, and to my surprise, I didn't feel any hesitation. I had already started the process of selling the house. It wasn't a decision I made lightly, but it was the right one. I didn't need this house to define me. I didn't need anyone to tell me how or where to live. The title of the house was in my name, Grace Monroe. I had earned it, and I would protect it, even if it meant parting with it. The days that followed were a blur. I moved into a small apartment in Oakland, a place I had owned for years. It wasn't grand or luxurious, but it was mine. It was peaceful. It was quiet, and it felt like a sanctuary. The house, the place I had shared with my husband and son, was now in the past. I was no longer trying to cling to memories or the life I thought I should have. I was creating a new life, one where I was the priority. I enrolled in an oil painting class at the local community college. I joined a few local activity groups. I reconnected with old friends and made new ones. And every morning, I took long walks by the lake, feeling the weight of the years lift off my shoulders with each step. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I was living for myself, not for anyone else. But even as I began to find peace, I couldn't escape the phone calls. Evan called several times in the first few days, his voice shaky and apologetic. "Mom, are you okay?" he would ask, always careful with his words, as if he were walking on eggshells. I knew it was coming. I knew he would try to make things right, but it wasn't enough. His guilt wasn't enough to undo the years of silence and neglect, and it certainly wasn't enough to undo the damage his wife had caused. Jessica, on the other hand, was a different story. She called a few times, her voice sweet as ever, but there was an edge to it. She wasn't concerned about me. She was concerned about herself. "Grace," she said one afternoon, "we're really struggling here. The bills are piling up, and it's hard to manage everything without you. I know things have been difficult, but we're family, right? We should be helping each other out. The audacity of it, the nerve. I didn't even respond at first. What was there to say? She had pushed me out of my own home, moved her parents in without asking, and now, just a few weeks later, she was asking for money, for help. The irony of it wasn't lost on me. The woman who had so casually invaded my life was now calling me for support. I let the silence stretch between us before finally responding, my voice calm but firm. I'm not going to help you. Jessica, you made your bed. You deal with it. And that was it. I didn't need to say anything more. The decision was made. I wasn't going back. I wasn't going to apologize for standing up for myself. I wasn't going to be guilted into giving when I had already given everything. The days passed, and I continued with my life, creating a routine that worked for me. But things with Jessica and Evan were far from over. They kept sending messages, trying to guilt trip me, to make me feel bad for not returning. But the truth was, I wasn't looking for redemption. I wasn't looking to be the hero of the story. I had simply learned that the greatest gift I could give myself was peace, and that meant cutting ties with those who had taken advantage of me for far too long. Weeks passed, and I settled into a new rhythm. My life was no longer centered around them, no longer tied to the endless demands, the silent expectations that I would always be there, always ready to give. And for the first time in years, I could feel the weight lifting from my chest. The peace that I had longed for was mine again, not just in my physical space, but in my mind as well. I had left everything behind the years of unspoken tension, the way my son Evan had allowed his wife Jessica to push me aside, the constant sense of being a caretaker without ever being asked if it was what I wanted. And yet, even in my new apartment in Oakland, there was a part of me that couldn't fully shake the shadow of the house, the family, and everything I had walked away from. It wasn't easy. I wasn't completely free of the ties that bound me to them. Evan continued to call. At first, his voice held a certain level of guilt, as if he thought I was just upset and would eventually come back. Mom, I know you're hurt, but we're a family. I don't want to lose you. I'll make things right, he would say, his words tentative, as though he was walking on thin ice. But I knew better. I had heard these empty promises for years, always the same excuses, the same reassurances that things would change, but they never did. Jessica's subtle manipulations, her shallow kindness masked with sharp edges, had worn me down. The idea that my own son couldn't or wouldn't stand up for me was what stung the most. It took everything in me to not pick up the phone when he called. Every fiber of my being told me to pick up, to hear him out, to give him one more chance. But I had already given him so many chances. My whole life had been about sacrifice, about doing what was best for them, even at the cost of my own happiness. And yet, when I needed them to do the same for me, to show just a fraction of the respect and love I had given them, I was left alone. I had given up the idea of reconciliation. I had accepted that this was my reality now, a life that wasn't about playing the role of the good mother, the good grandmother, or the good wife. It was a life where I could finally prioritize myself, my peace, my happiness, my well-being. And that was the greatest act of self-love I could have ever done. One afternoon, as I sat in the small, quiet living room of my apartment, my phone buzzed again. It was a text from Evan, and for a moment, my heart skipped. I hadn't heard from him in a week, and I thought, maybe, just maybe, he had finally come to his senses. "Mom, we need to talk. Please. I'm really struggling here. Heather's parents have been driving us crazy. The house is chaotic and everything's falling apart. We need help." The words hit me like a punch to the stomach. How ironic it was that now, when their perfect little world was crumbling, they were turning to me for help. They had pushed me out, shoved me into the corner of their home without a second thought. But now that their carefully curated life was falling apart, I was the one they came to. For a moment, I considered responding. The old me, the one who was still a mother at heart, the one who had been there through every tantrum, every scraped knee, every heartbreak, wanted to rush to his side. I wanted to comfort him, to tell him that everything would be okay. But the reality was, he had made his choice. He had chosen Jessica's side. He had chosen silence. And now, he had to deal with the consequences. I didn't respond to him. Instead, I stood up from the couch and walked over to the window. The sun was beginning to set, casting a soft, golden light over the quiet streets of Oakland. I took a deep breath and let the calm wash over me. This was my life now, a life where I was no longer beholden to anyone's expectations but my own. That evening, as I settled into bed, I found myself thinking about the house in Berkeley, the house that Jessica had so casually moved into, that she had assumed would always be hers. It made me sick to think about it, but what sickened me even more was the realization that the house, the life I had spent years building, had become nothing but a tool to them. It had become a place to store their baggage, a place where they could kick me out and act like it was just another day. I knew I needed to let go of it all. I had already started the process to sell the house, but I needed to make sure they understood that there would be no going back, no more second chances, no more playing the martyr. I was done. I called my lawyer the next morning and made sure everything was in order. I didn't want to leave any room for them to interfere. I wanted the sale to go through quickly, without complications. I had waited long enough. I had put up with enough. And now, I was going to make sure that they could no longer control me. The day the sale went through, I felt a sense of finality, a quiet satisfaction. The house was no longer mine, but I was no longer theirs. They no longer had any claim on me. But I also knew that this wasn't the end. It wasn't enough to simply sell the house and move on. I had to make sure that I was protected, that I wouldn't be taken advantage of again. I had to take control of my own future, my own legacy. So, I called my lawyer again and asked him to help me revise my will. I wasn't going to leave a penny to Jessica and Evan, not after everything they had done. They didn't deserve it. As the days passed, I began to feel more at ease. I had started a new chapter in my life, one where I wasn't defined by my role as a mother or a grandmother. I wasn't defined by anyone else's expectations of me. I was simply Grace, a woman who had lived through a lifetime of sacrifice and was finally ready to live for herself. I spent my days painting, walking by the lake, and meeting with old friends. I even traveled to a few small coastal towns, enjoying the simple pleasures of life. It was everything I had ever wanted, and yet it was so much more. And then, one day, as I was sitting in my favorite cafe, enjoying a cup of coffee and a slice of cheesecake, my phone buzzed again. It was a message from Evan. "Mom, I miss you. I've been thinking about everything, and I realize now that I was wrong. I should have stood up for you. I should have done better." For the first time, I felt a flicker of hope. Maybe, just maybe, things could be different. But then I remembered everything that had led me to this moment, the years of silence, the years of sacrifice, and the realization that the greatest act of love I could give to myself was to stop allowing them to take from me. I didn't respond right away. I sat back and thought about it for a while, and then, with a calm smile, I typed back one simple message: I'm doing just fine on my own. And I was. As the days turned into weeks, the silence between me and my family deepened. I had left the house in Berkeley and settled into my own apartment in Oakland, a modest place, but one that was entirely mine. No one could take it from me, not even the son I had raised, not even the woman who had so effortlessly taken over my life. In those first few days after I left, the emotions were raw, and the questions from Evan came one after another. "Mom, are you sure you're okay?" he asked. His voice sounded small, strained, as if he was testing the waters, wondering if I'd come back to them. I didn't respond at first. What was there to say his guilt wasn't enough to erase the damage that had already been done? The things that had been said and done could never be undone. The betrayal was too deep. Jessica had gotten what she wanted. She had moved her parents into the house, displaced me, and no one, not even Evan, had stood up for me. When I looked back on everything, it all seemed like a slow, steady erosion of respect. It wasn't just the house that had been taken from me. It was my place in the family. For years, I had been the caretaker, the provider, the one who made sure everyone else's needs were met. But when the time came for them to show any consideration for me, to stand up for what was right, they were nowhere to be found. That's when I realized I had to let go of them, of the house, of my expectations, of the people who couldn't appreciate what I had done for them. For too long, I had been carrying everyone else's burdens, and now it was time to put myself first. The decision wasn't easy, but it was necessary. I had spent years giving, sacrificing, and expecting nothing in return. But the truth was, the more I gave, the more they took. It wasn't love. It was an unspoken contract, one that I had unknowingly entered into, where my value was tied to my usefulness. When I stopped being useful, when I stopped taking care of everything for them, I was pushed aside. It hurt. It hurt deeply to realize that the people I had trusted, the people I had loved, could so easily cast me aside. But the hurt was no longer my primary concern. The priority was now my own well-being. I had spent too many years worrying about everyone else. It was time to take a step back, to take care of myself, and to rebuild a life that was just for me. That was when I took the next step. I started the process of selling the house in Berkeley. I had no intention of going back, no intention of allowing them to take over the home that I had built with my own two hands. When I called my lawyer, I wasn't sure how I felt. Part of me was sad. Part of me was angry. But most of all, I felt a strange sense of relief. For the first time in years, I wasn't bound by any obligation to anyone but myself. The process was swift. There were no arguments, no long discussions. I had made my decision, and there was no going back. I didn't care what Evan or Jessica thought. They had shown me that my presence meant nothing to them unless I was fulfilling a role they needed me to play. I wasn't going to be anyone's doormat anymore. I wasn't going to live in a home where I felt like an intruder. As the days went by, I made the apartment feel like mine. I unpacked my things, placed my late husband's photographs on the mantel, and arranged my furniture in a way that felt comfortable and familiar. I filled the space with the things that mattered to me, my favorite books, the knickknacks that had brought me joy for years, and the paintings I had created. It wasn't much, but it was mine. I no longer had to share it with anyone, and for the first time in a long time, I felt peace. But that peace was short-lived. The phone calls continued, now from Jessica and Evan, always full of excuses, always asking for something: help, money, time. At first, I wanted to answer, to explain myself, to try to make them understand. But then I realized that they didn't want understanding. They wanted control. They wanted me to fall back into the role they had created for me. They wanted me to continue being their caretaker, their emotional crutch, their free labor, and I wasn't going to let that happen anymore. Jessica's calls became more demanding. Grace, we're really struggling here. The bills are piling up. The house is too much for us. Can't you just help us out, just for a little while? Her voice was sweet, sugary, but I could hear the underlying urgency, the desperation. It was the same old game. She was trying to manipulate me into feeling sorry for them, trying to guilt me into giving them what they wanted. But I wasn't falling for it. I took a deep breath and ended the conversation, the same way I had ended the others, with calm resolve. No, Jessica, I won't help you. You made your decisions. Now you deal with the consequences. Don't ask me for anything again. And I meant it. There was no more room in my life for their demands, for their manipulation, for their self-serving behavior. The woman who had once been a daughter-in-law to me was now a stranger, someone who had used me, taken advantage of me, and showed no remorse. The calls from Evan became fewer, and I could tell that he was starting to understand that I wasn't going to bend to his or Jessica's will anymore. He tried to make me feel guilty, tried to tell me that I was being selfish, that I should just come back and help out. But I didn't budge. I had already made my peace with the decision. I had already let go of the person I once was, the person who put everyone else first. I began to focus more on my own life. I started spending my days doing things I had always wanted to do but had never made time for. I took long walks by the lake, went to the local cafe, and even took up a painting class at the community center. I wasn't just existing anymore. I was living. For the first time in years, I felt like I was in control of my own future. The silence in my apartment wasn't oppressive anymore. It was peaceful. It was the silence of freedom, and it felt good. And then, one day, I received the final notice from my lawyer the house in Berkeley had sold. The deal was done. The house, the memories, the life I had spent decades building it was all in the past. But I wasn't sad. I wasn't angry. I felt nothing but relief. That was the moment I realized how much weight I had been carrying for so long, how much I had sacrificed, how much I had given, only to be discarded when I was no longer useful. And now I was free, free from the guilt, free from the expectations, and free from the people who had tried to define my worth by what I could give them. Evan and Jessica no longer called. The silence between us had become permanent. I wasn't holding on to hope anymore. I wasn't waiting for them to change. I had learned that true freedom didn't come from waiting for someone else to fix things. It came from taking control of your own life, no matter the cost. And so, I kept living. I kept painting, kept walking, and kept enjoying the life that was finally mine to live. The greatest gift I had given myself wasn't just walking away from the house. It was walking away from the people who had made me feel small, unimportant, and invisible. I had spent too many years trying to please them, but now I was living for me. I didn't need their approval. I didn't need their love. What I had now was enough, and that was all I needed. As the days turned into weeks, I began to adjust to my new life, one that was no longer defined by the expectations of my family. I had moved into my small apartment in Oakland, a place I had owned for years but had never truly lived in. Now, it felt like a sanctuary, a place where I could finally breathe without the weight of constant demands hanging over my head. The years of playing the role of the perfect mother, the perfect grandmother, had left me exhausted, worn down, and unseen. But in this small apartment, I was finally able to reclaim myself. The only person who mattered now was me. I spent my days doing things that made me happy, things I had neglected for too long. I started a new hobby, painting landscapes and still life scenes that filled the walls of my apartment. I had always loved art, but had never had the time to truly pursue it. Now, I could paint as often as I wanted, losing myself in colors and textures that soothed my soul. I took long walks by the lake near my apartment, letting the fresh air fill my lungs and the peacefulness of nature heal the wounds I had carried for years. I even took up a creative writing class at the community college, something I had always dreamed of doing, but had never found the time for. It was a simple life, but it was mine, and for the first time in a long time, I felt like I was truly living. But as much as I enjoyed my solitude, there were still moments when the past would rear its ugly head. The phone calls from Evan continued, each one more desperate than the last. At first, I answered them out of a sense of obligation. He was my son, after all. I had spent his whole life nurturing him, guiding him, and now it felt strange to shut him out entirely. But every time I picked up the phone, I was reminded of why I had walked away. He never once stood up for me. Not when Jessica moved her parents in. Not when I was shoved aside and made to feel like an intruder in my own home. Mom, we need you. The house is a mess. Jessica's parents are making things unbearable. I don't know how much longer we can do this, he would say, his voice trembling with a mix of guilt and frustration. Each time he called, I could feel the pressure to help, to give in, but I had learned my lesson. The more I gave, the more they took, and that wasn't love. That was manipulation. I'm sorry, Evan, I said one day, my voice calm but firm. I've made my decision. I'm not coming back. You and Jessica made your choices. Now you have to deal with the consequences. There was a long pause on the other end of the line before he finally spoke again. Mom, please, don't make me choose between you and her. It was a painful question, but in that moment, I knew what I had to do. You don't have to choose, Evan, but I'm choosing me, and I won't apologize for it anymore. I ended the call before he could respond, and for the first time, I didn't feel guilty. It was the hardest thing I had ever done, but it was also the right thing. I had spent so many years sacrificing myself for everyone else, and all I had gotten in return was disappointment. The next few weeks were filled with a mixture of quiet satisfaction and occasional bouts of doubt. I had no illusions that this would be easy. There were moments when I felt lonely, moments when I missed my son and my grandson, but those feelings were fleeting, and they were soon replaced by a sense of empowerment. I had done something for myself. I had taken control of my life, and that was worth more than any temporary discomfort. One evening, as I sat on the couch reading a book, my phone buzzed. It was a message from Jessica. My stomach tightened as I opened it. She never messaged unless it was to ask for something. Grace, we need to talk. Things are getting really difficult here. I know I hurt you, but please, I need your help. Evan and I can't keep up with everything. The bills are piling up, and we don't know what to do. You're the only one who can help us." I stared at the message for a long time. Part of me wanted to reply, to reach out and ease the tension. I knew what it was like to struggle, to feel helpless. But then I remembered everything that had happened, the way she had moved her parents in without asking, the way she had shoved me into the guest room like I didn't matter. I remembered the look in her eyes when she spoke to me, the barely disguised contempt that had always been there, lurking beneath her sweet smile. I didn't respond to her message. Instead, I put my phone down and took a deep breath. I had made a promise to myself that I would no longer be anyone's emotional ATM or caretaker. They had made their decisions. Now, they had to live with the consequences. The silence stretched between us, and I found a strange sense of peace in it. The constant pressure to be there for them was gone. I could finally breathe without worrying about how to fix everyone else's problems. I could finally focus on my own happiness, on what I wanted to do with the rest of my life. But just as I had begun to feel truly free, the doorbell rang one afternoon. I wasn't expecting anyone, but when I opened the door, I found my son standing there, his face pale, his hands shaking. "Mom," he said, his voice cracking, "I can't do this anymore. Heather's losing it. The house is falling apart. Her parents are driving me crazy. I don't know what to do." I looked at him, at the man he had become, and I felt a pang of sadness. He was still my son, still the little boy I had raised. But in that moment, I realized that he was lost in the chaos of his marriage, lost in the life that he had chosen, and there was nothing I could do to fix it. He had to find his way out, just as I had found mine. "I'm sorry, Evan," I said softly. "I can't help you. You made your choice when you let Jessica treat me the way she did. You didn't stand up for me, and now you have to live with it." His face crumpled, and he looked like he wanted to say something more, but the words didn't come. He just stood there, silent and defeated, before finally turning away and walking down the stairs. I closed the door behind him, and as I leaned against it, I realized something important. My son was no longer the person I had raised. He was no longer the boy who had looked to me for guidance. He was a man who had made his choices, and now he had to live with them. I didn't feel angry anymore. I didn't feel sad. I felt a deep, quiet sense of relief. The weight of their expectations, of their demands, had been lifted. I was no longer bound by the past. I was free, and that freedom, that peace, was something I would never trade for anything. It was mine, and it was the greatest gift I had ever given myself. As the weeks continued to unfold, I settled into my new life with a quiet kind of determination. I had stopped waiting for Evan to call, stopped hoping that somehow he would come to his senses and finally realize what he had lost. My life was no longer defined by their needs, their demands, their expectations. For the first time in years, I wasn't beholden to anyone but myself. I could live on my terms, in a space that was mine, and it felt like freedom. But no matter how much I told myself that I was moving on, there were moments when the past would haunt me. It wasn't that I regretted my decisions, on the contrary. I knew I had made the right choice. But the reality of having been pushed aside by the people I loved, the ones I had cared for and nurtured, still stung. It was a quiet, unspoken ache that lingered in the back of my mind, like an old wound that never quite healed. And then one day, the phone rang. It was Evan. His name flashed across the screen, and for a moment, I hesitated. I had made my decision. I had walked away, and I wasn't looking back. I wasn't interested in hearing his half-hearted apologies or his guilt-ridden excuses. But despite everything, I still loved him. I still missed him. And part of me wondered if, just maybe, he had finally realized what he had done. I answered the phone. "Mom." His voice came through, low and strained. "Can we talk?" There was an edge to his words that told me this wasn't a simple check-in, that something had changed. But what could he possibly say to fix the damage that had been done? I braced myself, waiting for whatever was coming next. "I know things haven't been easy between us," he continued, "and I don't blame you for being upset. I understand why you left." His words were slow, carefully chosen, like he was trying to navigate a minefield. "But I need you to know that I'm sorry for everything, for not standing up for you, for letting Jessica do what she did." I let his words hang in the air for a moment, letting them settle in. I wasn't sure what I was supposed to say. The apology, though long overdue, wasn't enough to erase the hurt, to erase the years of silence, the years of being overlooked and undervalued. It wasn't just about this one incident, this one betrayal. It was about everything that had come before it, the constant sense that my life and my feelings didn't matter as much as everyone else's. "I appreciate you saying that, Evan," I said quietly, my voice steady but firm. "But apologies can't change what's happened. They can't undo the years of silence, the years of me being invisible in my own family. I gave everything to you, to your family, and when I needed you to be there for me, to stand up for me, you weren't. And that's something I can't just forgive. Not yet." There was a long pause on the other end of the line. I could hear him breathing, but he didn't speak. I could feel the weight of his guilt pressing through the phone, and for a moment, I almost felt sorry for him. Almost. But then I remembered. I remembered how hard I had fought for them, how much I had sacrificed, and how little it had meant in the end. "I know," he finally said. "I know it's not enough, but I need you to know that I'm trying. I'm trying to fix things with Jessica, and I'm trying to be a better son to you." I closed my eyes for a moment, letting his words wash over me. There was a time when I would have held on to those words, when I would have latched onto them like a lifeline, convinced that everything would be okay if I just gave him one more chance, but not anymore. I had learned the hard way that actions spoke louder than words, and Evan's actions, for all their apologies, had shown me that he wasn't ready to change. He wasn't ready to stand up for what was right. Not yet. "I'm glad you're trying, Evan," I said softly, "but I've made my peace. I've moved on, and I need you to do the same. I can't keep waiting for you to choose me. You've had your chance, and you chose not to take it." I heard him exhale, a soft, almost defeated sound. "I understand, Mom. I really do. I don't know what else to say." And for the first time, I didn't feel the need to fill the silence with words. I didn't feel the need to offer more reassurance or false promises. I simply let the silence linger between us, knowing that it was the most honest thing I could offer. "I'll always love you, Evan," I said quietly, my heart heavy with the weight of the truth. "But I can't keep doing this. I can't keep being the one who holds everything together while everyone else falls apart." I hung up the phone, feeling both lighter and heavier all at once. The conversation had been hard, harder than I had anticipated, but it was necessary. I had said what needed to be said. I had drawn the line in the sand, and now it was up to Evan to decide which side he was going to stand on. That night, I sat in the quiet of my apartment, letting everything sink in. I thought about my son, about the years of sacrifice and love that had gone unappreciated. I thought about the way Jessica had moved in with her parents and turned my home into a place where I no longer felt welcome. I thought about how I had given up so much of myself for them and how, in the end, it had all been for nothing. But as I sat there, I realized something else. For the first time in a long time, I didn't feel like a victim. I didn't feel sorry for myself. I felt strong. Strong because I had made the decision to stop sacrificing my happiness for the sake of others. Strong because I had let go of the guilt, the pressure, and the shame that had kept me tethered to a life that wasn't mine to begin with. The phone call with Evan hadn't given me the closure I had hoped for, but it had given me something even more important, the strength to move forward. I wasn't waiting for his approval anymore. I wasn't waiting for his apology to heal the wounds that had been left open for far too long. I was healing on my own, and that, in itself, was enough. A few weeks after that conversation with Evan, I began to notice something that, at first, I couldn't quite put my finger on. It wasn't just the silence from my son and daughter-in-law that had settled between us. It was a kind of calm, a peace that felt like a new beginning, a life where I wasn't always looking over my shoulder, wondering when the next crisis would hit. It was strange, but also liberating, to finally be able to live without worrying about other people's expectations or demands. The phone calls from Evan slowed to a trickle. There were a few, spaced out over the next few weeks, each one more apologetic than the last. He would ask how I was doing, but I could hear the unease in his voice. He was trying to reconnect, trying to fix something that I knew, deep down, was beyond fixing. It wasn't that I didn't love him. I did, more than anything, but love wasn't enough anymore. I had given him everything I had for years, and I had received nothing but silence and indifference in return. It was time for him to take responsibility for his own life. One evening, as I was sitting at my small kitchen table, sipping on a cup of chamomile tea, I heard a knock at the door. It was late, too late for anyone to be stopping by. I stood up, a little surprised, and walked to the door. When I opened it, I was taken aback by the sight of my son standing there, looking like a ghost of the person I had raised. "Mom," Evan said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Can we talk?" There was something different about him this time. He wasn't the same person who had called me, guilt-ridden, asking for help. This time, he looked broken, defeated, almost as if the weight of everything he had done was finally starting to sink in. His eyes were red, his hair unkempt, and his clothes wrinkled, like he hadn't bothered to change in days. There was no more pride in him, no more bravado. It was as though he had finally realized the gravity of what he had done. I didn't invite him in. I didn't want to make things easy for him. Not this time. "What is it?" "Evan," I asked, my voice calm but firm. "I've been thinking about everything," he said, his words stumbling over each other. "About what I did, about how I treated you, and I know I can't fix it, but I need you to know that I'm sorry. I'm so sorry." "Mom." I stared at him for a moment, my heart aching at the sight of him. He looked so small, so vulnerable, and I wanted to reach out and comfort him. But I couldn't. Not anymore. Not after everything. I had to stand firm. For both of us. "Evan," I said softly, "sorry doesn't fix this. Sorry doesn't undo the years of silence. Sorry doesn't erase the way you let her treat me. You chose to stay silent when you should have spoken up. You chose to let her push me aside, and that choice is what hurt me the most. He opened his mouth to speak, but I raised my hand to stop him. No, I'm not done. I said, I love you, Evan. You're my son, and that will never change. But I can't keep sacrificing myself for you anymore. I can't keep putting my life on hold, waiting for you to wake up and realize what you've lost. I've done everything for you, for your family, and when I needed you the most, you were nowhere to be found. His eyes filled with tears, and for a moment, I almost felt sorry for him. But then I remembered this wasn't just about him. This was about me, too. I had spent my entire life bending and breaking for them, but I was done with that. I was done being their doormat, done being their emotional punching bag. I'm sorry, too, Evan, I said, my voice steady. I'm sorry I let myself be invisible for so long. I'm sorry I let you take me for granted, but I'm not sorry for leaving. I'm not sorry for putting myself first for the first time in years. He stood there, silent, looking at me like he couldn't quite comprehend what I was saying. And I realized then that he probably couldn't. He had never had to live with the consequences of his actions. He had never had to truly face the weight of his choices. But that was something he would have to learn on his own. I had already learned that lesson the hard way. I'm sorry, Mom, he said again, his voice trembling. I didn't know what I was doing. I didn't know how much I was hurting you. I nodded, but I didn't feel the need to say anything more. He had said what needed to be said, and now it was time to move on. I know you're sorry, Evan, but sorry doesn't change the past, and it doesn't change the fact that I've already made my decision. I'm not coming back. I'm not going to be the person you want me to be anymore. He stood there for a moment, looking like he wanted to say more, but then he simply nodded, a resigned expression on his face. I understand, Mom, he whispered. I really do. I just wanted you to know that I'm sorry. With that, he turned and walked away, leaving me standing in the doorway. And as I watched him disappear down the hallway, I felt a strange sense of peace settle over me. For the first time in years, I felt like I had finally let go of something that had been weighing me down. I closed the door softly behind me and leaned against it, taking a deep breath. The pain wasn't gone, not completely, but it was fading. I had done what I needed to do. I had set the boundaries, and now it was up to Evan to decide what kind of relationship he wanted to have with me. But I wasn't going to wait for him anymore. I wasn't going to beg him to love me. I wasn't going to force him to see me. The truth was, I had spent my whole life fighting for others, for my family, for my son. But now, it was my turn. It was my turn to live for myself, to do the things that made me happy, to find joy in the simple things. I didn't need their approval. I didn't need their validation. I spent the rest of the evening painting, letting the brush move freely across the canvas as I lost myself in the act of creation. For the first time in a long time, I felt truly at peace. The silence wasn't oppressive anymore. It was liberating. And as I sat there, surrounded by the quiet of my apartment, I realized that this was what true freedom felt like. It wasn't about cutting people off or shutting them out. It was about choosing yourself, even when it hurt. It was about walking away from toxic relationships, even when the love was still there. And that was exactly what I had done, and I was finally free. Throughout our lives, we often dedicate ourselves to caring for others, especially our family. We sacrifice putting their needs above our own, simply hoping for their happiness. But there's one important thing we must remember sometimes. True happiness comes from knowing when to let go, when to stop and care for ourselves. Whether it's with parents, children, or friends, we cannot keep giving without receiving respect and love in return. The lesson I've learned from this story is don't allow yourself to be the one constantly enduring in a relationship when you've given so much without receiving the respect and love you deserve. Always remember, you are worthy of love, respect, and a life of your own. Take the time to listen to yourself, to recognize when it's time to change and take control of your own life. Don't be afraid to make difficult decisions, because sometimes that decision is the key to finding your true happiness. If you found this story meaningful, don't hesitate to leave a comment and share your thoughts. Be sure to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss out on more touching and insightful stories about life.